Jay, thank you so much for being a guest on my podcast, Therapy for Guys. I'm super excited to connect with you tonight and just have this conversation to see where it goes.
Oh, thanks, man. It's great to be here.
Dude, I've got to say I'm jealous because my recent man crush is Peter Rollins. And when you told me that you guys have been best friends for 10 years, a little part of me died inside. So
Well, I mean, you could try to steal them away. Um,
I might be able to take you.
Go for it, man. It's a lot of persistence, though. You really have to be persistent with him.
Well, he's already shared that he's not great at answering emails, so you know.
Well, he's not good at any type of formal communication. So, except for
Okay.
like telephone, he's like an eight. Like I think Pete may have been made like in a factory somewhere
I got you.
because like he doesn't like he also doesn't have a lot of like I can't, you can't bring up a lot of like things from like the past, like,
Hmm.
like, oh, in the 80s when we did this, and he's like, yes, you too. That's like his answer for everything. Like he knows who you two is, and he knows that Miami Vice was a cool show, but besides that, he doesn't have a lot of clear memories. No, Pete's, you know, fascinating,
Yeah, he seems like
and
just
I
a
get it,
genuine,
like,
loving person.
and I don't have a lot of friends, and so it's really strange to like have Pete as my best friend. He's an intense, interesting, hilarious human being, and I mean, our friendship at this point is, I mean, he's like family, I mean, he is family. Like when I
Wow.
went home, I go see his mom, and his mom's, we're hugging each other and hanging out. Like I have to go see his mom every time I go into town, and it's like, yeah, Pete's and his work changed my life. And it was the weird thing is because that didn't happen right away. We kind of
Got
became
you.
friends. And then I went through a really tough time through my second divorce, and finally cracked open a couple of his books, I think out of just
Mm.
pure desperation. And was really like, was really surprised that he had some good things to say. Um, but he's helped me along the way with philosophy and things like that. And as my message has changed over time, he's been there a lot. I
Sure.
mean, he's one of the few people who really convinced me not to quit when I went through my second divorce, and I was very suicidal and I had a really tough time. And he was like, a lot of people were like, yeah, you should take some time off. And yeah,
Mm.
maybe you should figure out something else to do. And he was like, no, this is what we do, man.
Wow.
And so yeah, he's not just a great philosopher, he's a great human being.
Wow.
So
So Jay, let me say this. I have a good friend. When I was finding out about Pete through Richard Boothby, I have a friend that said, "Oh my God, you need to connect with Jay Bakker." I don't know if he actually knows you, but he threw out your name, and so I kind of started following you on Instagram. So I have to admit, I don't know much about you, except for just really binging the fuck out of your mom's, like the documentary about her. We watched the
yeah.
movie twice, and then we saw One Punk Under God, which was incredible. So I'd love to hear more about your story, and then if we can, maybe explore some things around your mom, which
Yeah.
are just really powerful for me in the current moment.
Well, it's yeah. Well, one, Pete would be very happy that you don't know that much about me and that you really like
Okay.
his work. That would make him
Yes.
very happy. Um, because he's a evil little man. No, but yeah, so yeah, and it's funny because like, yeah, but it's a weird connection. So for me, I've been doing what I've been doing for almost 30 years now,
Wow.
which is revolution. And
Okay.
revolution was originally a church for a very long time, and now we call ourselves a gathering.
Okay.
And that's just because I feel like the church is not in a place where it needs to be, and I just
Mm.
don't feel like that's the right word for us to use. But for me, I grew up, as you saw in the documentary, like son of like two of the most famous televangelists in the world.
Yeah.
And basically my parents built this huge retreat center that also had a water park and all like hotels and
It
all
was like
these things
third
that
to
people.
Disney, I
It was third
discovered.
to Disney,
Wow.
yeah, which is insane because it was in like it was on the border of North and South Carolina. So we're talking like
Mm,
Fort Mill and Rock Hill, like not a lot of areas that people know of.
sure.
Being, it wasn't like Orlando and LA, and yeah, and so it was really wild growing up. I had to have security guards. Um, I was on TV a lot. I mean, thousands and thousands of people got my school pictures every year. It was that
Wow.
type of thing, as where my family was kind of like fully immersed into the work, and the family was part of that, which has affected me in a lot of negative ways, but also positive ways. And so I'm definitely an individual.
Mm,
And then in the growing up in that, and then in the late 80s, around 87, there was this big scandal that just shook everything apart. And then a
sure.
couple of years later, my father goes to prison and gets 45 years.
Wow.
So that was really wild, watching your parents talk about Jesus loves you every day, and then all of a sudden, like, nobody seemed to love them back. you know
Yeah.
and everybody wanted to sit on the couch with them one day, and then the next day no one wanted to even touch them with the 10-foot pole. So
Well, and it
growing up in
sounds like
that
things
was,
got really fucked up with Jerry Falwell. That
yeah,
really
well,
pissed
Jerry
me
Falwell
off.
came in to kind of like say that he was going to help my family, but ended up doing a bait and switch
Mm,
and taking over the whole thing, and really destroying my parents' ministry, when my parents
yeah.
put a lot of faith in him to help them, like, get through the scandal. And and so you go from like that, then, like, we're and I was used to like local DJs and stuff like that making fun of my parents, because my mom wore a
Okay.
lot of makeup, and she was very much an individual. And
Yes.
and a very out, lots of makeup, very loving of people, very, just great spirit. I mean, that's why there's a film about her starring Jessica Chastain. That's why, Elton John just did a play in London about my mom, and my
Oh,
dad.
wow. I didn't realize
So
that.
it's like, yeah, I just was out in London a couple months ago, and I got to see it. And it was really great. It was really amazing to see. And
Can I pause you just real quick? And
yep.
my honest, like, response to all the makeup, I got upset because all these motherfuckers, right, are like making fun of her and doing all these
Yeah.
t-shirts and the ridicule. I don't know. From my perspective, it seemed like she was tapping into beauty, aesthetics, and I don't know, from my angle, like a performative way of thinking about identity in the world.
No,
I don't
you're
know. I don't know
right.
if that resonates with you or if you have a
It
different
does
perspective.
resonate, and you can continue to record and go on that, because that, I mean, my mom's makeup in some ways was her. I can't remember who said it, but it's like, often when we wear a mask, we're able to be who we truly are.
Yeah, absolutely.
And my mom's makeup was a way of her allowing her to be who she really was.
Mm,
And she grew up not feeling attractive. And it's weird thing is, my mother was a very attractive woman without
very
makeup.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. But she wore the makeup, and it was kind of an armor, and it kind of allowed her to be transparent in every other area of her life. And I
Wow.
remember the last year of her life, um, she was at home. She died from cancer, colon cancer.
Mm.
And she came out, and she was touching my tattoos on my arms, and she goes, your tattoos are like my makeup,
Mm.
and she's like, they kind of protect you, don't they? And I was like, yeah, I guess so. It's kind of like a weird type of art. You come in and you're like, all right, well, everybody can judge me now, and let's get it over with.
Mm.
And it allows you to be your transparent self. I mean, I'm sure it's very like Freudian and Tillichian and all of that. I don't know if that's how you say Tillich. People who study Tillich, but would it be Tillichian?
I don't know.
um,
Hey, that's something probably Pete would know.
yeah, Pete would know that. Yeah, or make fun of me, or let me say it
Well,
wrong
I would
15 times.
email him and ask him, but I wouldn't hear back. So,
Yeah, yeah, no, it's not worth it. Um, so yeah, it's Yeah, and people did make fun of it, but it was funny. The weird thing is, I remember in the malls when we go to the mall a lot, and they had this
Yeah.
shirt, the '80s. I ran into Tammy Faye at the mall, and it's like a makeup splat on the
That's the
front.
one that got to me when I saw that.
Yeah, and she would laugh and she would autograph them.
Wow.
You know, and she always just really loved people, even when they were mean to her. Like if they were mean to her, she would go like, "Well, at least shake my hand, at least get to know me."
Dude,
And
that scene in the
yeah,
movie, I don't know if it's based on reality, but when those like douchebag teenagers, and I work with teenage boys, that's my specialty. So I know those
oh,
fucking assholes, how they can be when they're making fun of her and
but the
she
funny thing
walks
is
up to,
the story is even better than what they put in the film.
okay,
And I
please tell
sat
me this
after I
story.
saw the film, I sat down with the writer and director and said, "You guys
Okay.
should have called me
Wow.
because the story's better." These kids were making fun of her, and it was at the mall.
Mm,
And so she walked up and goes, "Hey, kids, I get it. You're going to make fun of me. But if you're going to make fun of me, at least meet me first."
wow.
And then she goes, "I don't know what you guys are doing, but if you want, there's a Marie Callender's upstairs, which is like a pie food restaurant." She goes,
Oh yeah.
"I'll take you guys up. You can order whatever you want and we can just chat." And they said yes. They were like little skateboard guys because she knew me because I grew up in skateboarding, and she knew my friends. So like wild looking kids weren't anything crazy to her.
Wow.
And she took them up and bought them lunch and talked to them, and I'm like, and it was kind of cool because I also know that time in her life when she was in California in Palm Desert, she was kind of lonely. So I thought how cool that was that she did that for them, but how cool it was that she got to spend time with these kids. And I'm like, I don't think I would have the guts to do that. Like if someone
No.
like confronted me for making fun of them and invited me to lunch, I would be like, "No, I gotta go."
Sure.
And it was that was really my mom's spirit. There was something really special about my mom. And it's interesting that you say this stuff is because the same came out of like me and Pete's friendship, and Helen, who he also works with and does films with.
I wanted to
We
ask about that because she commented on an Instagram thing, and I was like, "Wait, who is this person?" And then I looked at some of her posts, and she had all this stuff about your mom, and referred to her as a saint, which I want to call her a saint of
Yeah.
like this radical Christianity. I was like, "Fuck, what's going on
Well,
here?"
Helen's one of the most brilliant people I've ever met in my life.
Wow.
Like she's one of those people who reads Hegel and understands it. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
I try and can't understand it.
Like Pete gives me a hard time about like how long it takes me to read like the Hegel's commentary, you know, but like Helen is the one who makes fun of him of how long it takes him to get through it. You know what I mean? Like
Ah,
she's brilliant. She speaks like 6 different languages. She's just great. And they've done this. They have a production company called Magician's Niece.
oh, okay. Are they
And
related?
yeah, and they made films. They made a film together.
Oh, okay.
Have that film Making Love? They had a film called that. I'm trying to think of the other. They've made a few indie films
Got
together.
you. I'm kind of a newbie, but I'm realizing I have a lot of homework to do.
Oh yeah, so they've made a few films together, and um, and, and they're both just really brilliant people. And when we were all together, they started having a lot of the same insights about my mother as well.
Got you.
And so that's when we decided we were going to do this project together. And originally it was just going to be like a psychoanalytic look at my mother's life.
Okay. Wow.
But then we ended up talking to Vice about it. And this is probably all I can say about it because we're still in
Sure.
production.
Sure. Sure.
But and Vice said, "Yeah, we want to do this. We're interested." So we started this work on this doc, and it's become a lot bigger than we had originally intended.
Mm.
But yeah, it's yeah. I'll let you go and ask what you want to ask. But yeah, she was the real deal, and I was really grateful to have her as a mother
No, that's
and kind of be
amazing.
very similar lines of work.
Okay. Okay. So Jay, I paused you, and it's my job as a therapist to remember everything. So you were kind of tracing out your own story because I'm also very interested in learning about you. You were kind of telling the audience kind of where you came from, and then right
Yeah.
when you talked about your mom, I paused you. So growing up where you grew up, I guess what did your teenage and like early adulthood years look like? I'm curious about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my teenage years, well, everything happened when I was about 11 was when the scandal happened.
Okay.
And so around that time, my father and mother are trying to rebuild something new. And so they try to start a show out in Florida, around
Oh,
Orlando,
okay.
Florida. But then my dad it has to go to court. It's the federal government versus Jim Bakker because they're saying he's guilty of wire fraud and mail fraud. I mean, it's ridiculous how to get into it because it's not about stealing money. It's about overbooking hotels, basically.
Got you.
So my dad gets these charges against him. And so, we were on the front page of every newspaper, Saturday Night Live skits and all this stuff, like in 87, 88, 89. Around end of 89, it seems like things are starting to slow down, but then my dad's case starts up. And of course, the media is everywhere again. And I was going to a Christian Baptist school.
Okay.
Called First Academy. And the problem was at this school is the teachers were giving me a harder time than the students.
Oh, geez. How so?
Well, just unconsciously, like I would just get in trouble for everything.
Okay.
Like if I wash it, like you're supposed to have a pocket on your t-shirt. If I forgot my pocket on my tee, I got sent home. If I had any issues, like, there was a girl I liked. It was in 7th grade. Like we would call her boyfriend and girlfriend. They called her parents and were like, you got to get your daughter away from this kid.
Oh my God.
It was just like, they just kind of like, because of who my parents were, I was just like seen as like this project or this troubled child. And so I ended up dropping out there and then going to high school. I just went from 7th to 9th grade, and not because of grades. It's just because my mom knew I had friends who were in high school and thought she just went and signed me up, put me in, which nobody asked about until 6 months into that first year of 9th grade. And they let me stay because I was already there for so long. But it was because there was so much going on. And for me, going into the public school system was better. Like being in a way, like it was like meeting normal kids who seemed to think it was actually kind of cool. I mean, there were fuss fights too. I mean, there were people who said dumb stuff.
Okay.
But, these teachers didn't really have time to care about who I was because they had a full workload.
Got you.
It wasn't a private school. They weren't worrying they weren't worrying what I was doing when I was off campus.
Right. Yeah.
As the other school was. And, so it was a nice change, and it was kind of my first experience of like inclusion and feeling somewhat normal. At the same time, having to go visit my dad in prison, and leave him there. And that was huge. That was really scary,
Oh, I bet.
So yeah, I mean, it wasn't an easy life. But I'm grateful for like some of the friends I had when I was a teenager, because they definitely helped to make my life better. And, I was giving Pete a hard time on Instagram when he posted up that he did an interview with you. I was like, therapy for men? What are you talking about?
I was like, oh my gosh, is this guy against me?
No. And I told him, Pete was like, oh man, you're going to have to apologize. Because I was giving Pete crap, not you.
Got you.
Because I've been going to therapy since I was about 12 years old.
Got you.
And therapy's changed my life. Like now I go to an analyst. But I've been on DBT, I've done EMDR.
You've done it all.
ED, I've had electric shock therapy.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I've done everything. And I respect the profession more than anything. Like I love Freud. I love, I love psychology. It's changed my life. It's saved my life, and so for me, that's also why I was joking, because Pete knows, like, I've pretty much lived on the couch or on the chair somewhere my whole life. And some have been great and some have been really awful. But, also, it was therapy that landed me in my 12-step program, and why I got sober when I was 20.
Wow.
Because my therapist said, I think you might have a problem with drinking. And I was like, well, what do you mean? Because in my mind, I thought alcoholics were like wearing wife beaters, sitting on a couch, screaming at somebody.
Right.
And so therapy's had such a huge part of my life and really allowed me to accept who I am and the strange world that I was born into, this kind of like having parents that are, there's some people who are like Bakker apologists, you know what I mean? Like they just love my family and are loyal to my family to the very end. Like some even got mad at me because I liked the movie because they didn't feel like, the apologists didn't feel like the movie was accurate enough. Like, man, I'm just glad to have something somewhat positive from all the things
Yeah,
I grew
I
up with.
actually thought it was quite positive. I mean, from my perspective, you know.
Yeah. Well, and I think, they did a great job of humanizing my father as well,
Mm,
and I have a complicated relationship with my dad. I mean, I haven't talked to my dad in like 3 years. And, but I've always felt that he was a good man.
mm,
And so it was nice to see people treating him as though he was a human being and not that he
yes,
was some guy curling his mustache to like, he did his work because he believed in it and he loved what he did. And my mom did as well. And they were
sure.
able to do that, do such a huge thing because they really complemented each other.
Gotcha.
They were a team,
That was
and so when my
that.
mom interviewed this guy, Steve, in the 80s, who had AIDS before anybody
Yeah,
else had,
I
I think it
love
was
that.
85 or 86. Um, she did it rather than my dad did because my dad knew if he did it, he couldn't get away with it. But he was like, well, if Tammy does it, and everybody kind of like, oh, Tammy, she could get away with stuff. So they were able to have this really great balancing act of
Mhm,
inclusion, if you will, when they worked how they worked together and really love people in a really unique way. They weren't really into politics. My dad's into politics now, but back then they weren't into the Christian right or anything like that.
right.
They just wanted people to accept themselves, say, hey, you can come here and have some time away. You can, if your marriage is having struggles, we have marriage therapists. We have
Mhm,
all sorts of different things. We have, if your kids are bored and don't want to go watch preaching all day, they can go to the water park. They did something that was really wild and really creative and really different. And but like coming out of all that, the world really mocked it. And so then you've got this other side of
mm,
people who aren't the apologists. You got the other people who just hate your family and all this stuff. And
gotcha. Like the
it's a weird
tabloids.
world. It's a weird dynamic.
Mm. How did man? I guess, and I'm always careful on the podcast. I never want to go too deep or ask questions that my clients or my clients. That's a Freudian slip. That my that my guests
They're
feel
good.
uncomfortable with. But man, how did that
Shoot.
fuck with your psyche to be in the middle of both all the praise, but then also the haters?
Well, I think what the hindsight with a good analyst, I'm able to look back and go like, oh wow, like I wasn't allowed to have normal feelings towards my parents,
Mm,
because I had all these groups doing them on their behalf. So you had these groups defending them or these groups hating them, and
wow.
and so I didn't have that kind of like normal experience. So my kind of reaction was to kind of try to protect them,
Mm,
because everything was falling apart. And those were my two structures. Those are the two people I had to lean on. And then my dad goes to prison. So, my mom becomes somebody I want to keep safe. And here my mom is able to deal with criticism in the most unarming, most loving, forgiving way, But sometimes when I would be with her in places, I'd be walking behind her and I'd hear somebody say something, and my reactions were not like hers.
yeah.
Mine were like, "What the hell did you just say?"
Oh yeah, I bet.
That kind of thing. So it really damages you, and also how you see the church, how you see and I mean, we're talking church capital C. I mean, there was not a
Okay.
church in the world, or less in the United States, that I could go to that didn't have an opinion on my family.
Okay.
And oftentimes I would slip into a church and there would still be a joke, or they would
Mm,
be used as an example of what not to do,
mm,
and this type of thing. So yeah, I mean, it was really tough to grow up in that. And
mm.
then the thing is like so many people nowadays, oh, well, they were famous and that's what you get. And oh, well, you were just that's part of life. It's amazing the lack of sympathy you get from fellow human beings. But I find that to be more like an online thing,
Okay.
social media world,
It's
than it is in
awful out
person.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm really grateful that like the scandal didn't happen during the social media time,
Oh my God.
because that would have just been like 5 times the fire,
Sure.
because you just got anybody who just has a slight opinion just saying something.
Mm,
And so I feel like I dodged a bullet with that. But, it's taught me to have empathy for people. It's also in my work. I don't believe in scapegoating. I don't
okay.
like binary thinking as far as like good and evil or conservative
I
and
so
liberal,
resonate with that.
you
Yeah.
know, and because they scapegoat each other. And I know what it's like to have your family kind of scapegoated. and been like, well, we'll just like, well, we don't like these guys, and your parents did the same thing and they screwed up, so we're going to just focus everything onto them,
Yes.
And so in my work, I always try to make sure I'm not scapegoating a group of people, or I'm not trying to lean like, I'm not definitely not a conservative, but when I originally first came out of all this, I thought, well, maybe the liberals are the safe people,
Fuck no.
No, they're not. I mean, they've somehow over the years seemed to pick up the worst parts of like organized religion.
Absolutely.
Like the whole idea of like being canceling and all these rules and regulations, and like if you
Seems
say
like
something
fucking
you don't like, then
Puritans.
all of a sudden you've been red pilled.
Right, right.
And so it's like I don't find safety on either sides, but I also try not to take too much of a judgment. I try to find a place of understanding.
Gotcha. Can I tell you one of the things that I read from Helen Rollins when she was reflecting on your mother that I thought was so powerful was, if I
Sure.
can remember from it, she says, your mother, Tammy, took the contradictions of life and didn't create oppositions.
Yeah.
God,
Yeah.
that resonated with me.
Well, and it's insane because that's a very like Hegelian idea. Okay,
Absolutely.
so and my
Absolutely.
mother has she wasn't a theologian, much less a philosopher, but these are ideas that kind of came to her naturally,
Mm,
and that she just did, like she just like, and the great thing about being able to like, because as you like Todd McGowan introduced me to like Hegel and
same
got me
here.
into that, so yeah, start studying Hegel. And my analyst is a Hegelian analyst, which is really
Oh my
wild and kind of
God.
cool.
That's
So
crazy.
yeah, so I'm able to understand. I actually have a necklace. I don't have it on right now, but it says contradiction on it.
Mm,
To live into that to have a contradiction and not have that opposition, or to create the opposition out of the contradiction, is a really beautiful thing. And it always kind of allowed her to walk into two different worlds. So she
mm,
could be with like, the conservative Baptists, one day, and then be with drag queens,
love it.
at the gay bookstore the next day, and she just loved people. And she
Mm,
just, felt like there's not any room for junk here. There's not, church is a hospital. It's not a courtroom type of
I love
mentality of like,
that.
we're here to heal people and love people and meet people where they're at. So when you kind of grow up seeing that shown to you, I mean, so I was really had as a head start into my work.
Yes.
Both of my parents laid kind of that foundation. It wasn't like, oh, I've got to become a famous preacher. It
Hmm.
was, oh, I've got to do this, and I have to do it in a different way. I have to include people. I have to love people. And when I started to think that maybe that religion didn't do that well, I left for a little while until I really
Okay.
started to understand the Bible for myself, and started to read, like history books and philosophy books and theology, starting to read theology and go, oh, good commentary. And
So was that around the time that One Punk Under God was filmed? Is
well,
that the
no, actually, no, that would have been about, I started in 94,
Oh, okay.
and that was probably in 2005. So that's like 11 years later.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, I continued to grow on my journey over time. And, and so I'm always grateful for that kind of like that love trumps everything kind of
Mhm.
idea. And like, if, and to the point where I kind of like took it even a step further, it's like, hey, listen, if it's like the Buddha, like if you see the Buddha on the pathway, kill the Buddha,
Kill the
my
Buddha,
thing was
yeah.
like, yeah, like if loving other people, if the Bible or religion or God gets in the way, you kill God, you kill the Bible, you push it away, and you love people
Mm.
and you connect to people.
I think
And
Jesus
then to
would be
realize
okay
that
with
that is
that.
actually the message, then I started to realize, wait, this is the message.
Yeah.
This is just the message that hasn't been applied to religious tradition, and probably, in my lifetime for a
Mm.
long time. And so I was like, all right, well, these are the things now that I see these here, like, loving your enemy, doing good to those who persecute you, loving your neighbor as yourself, never giving up, never losing faith, always being hopeful, enduring through every circumstance, which is nearly impossible. But these are the things that's talking about. And you go,
Mm.
oh, this is what my mom understood, you know, and you don't have to be a theologian to understand that. I mean, it helps. it helps to realize that that's at the essence of it. And it helps when someone who's like a neo-Calvinist or a conservative Assemblies of God or comes along and starts spewing things out at you, you can at least say,
Right.
actually, no. What this means is, having decent scholarship really helps. And I think one
Sure.
of the things that's really helped me with my theology, to go back to my friend Pete Rollins,
Yes.
Pete's helped that way, but also by introducing me to Paul Tillich, who I really got into.
He's probably one of I don't read theology as much anymore as I used to, but he's one of the
Yeah.
ones that I still really love and access for sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, Tillich is amazing. Even Tillich's talks, like, even like when he would talk at like at the church, at the schools. Like I have 3 collections of books of just his talks, and he has
I
this
don't think I've
book
ever
called "You
accessed
Are."
that. Man,
Yeah, there's a book.
you're gonna have to turn me on to that. I'd love to
I
read that
definitely
shit.
will. I'll
Okay.
send you I'll send you the titles. They're
Okay,
really
thank you.
good. "Shaking the Foundations" is the name of one of the books, and there's a talk in there called "You Are Accepted," and
Mm,
it's basically about grace.
mm.
And if you wanted to sum up my work and what I've done for the past 30 years, the one
Yes,
string
please.
that's pulled along all the way is grace, is the
Mm.
message of grace and inclusion and acceptance. And not just like grace is like, it's not I'm talking about forgiveness. I'm
Right.
talking about pure acceptance. And I'm not talking about acceptance that comes when you change or anything. One of the things I've been saying the past couple of years is grace is anarchy. And the reason it's
Mm.
anarchy is it moves outside of everyone's system, because no, it's not fair. I mean,
Right,
you'll often
right.
see like sometimes like the new
My
atheists
kids are
will
like,
always,
that wasn't fair.
yeah, a new atheist used to always be like, well, the guy who murdered 18 people on death row can just say a prayer and he's okay.
Yeah.
How's that fair? And I'm like, it's not fair. And grace is even bigger than that, because it's pure
I
acceptance.
love that.
And so that's kind of the thing that's rung through with my work for forever.
Mm.
And that's what Tillich's "You Are Accepted" talk was about. And so just getting good, and the more I've understood like good scholarship and then good philosophy, I find that theology kind of comes from blending those two together.
Got you.
Is philosophy and scholarship really creates a great theology. And I feel like that's what Tillich was doing. I think that's why Tillich was a philosopher and a theologian,
Mm.
and I really admire people like that. And that's also, I mean, I guess that's what Pete is too. He's a theologist or theologian and philosopher as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So Jay, okay, yeah, because having just this is amazing. Having just finished your documentary, would you mind just maybe talking a little bit more of how you maybe kind of developed from that point? I think it was like 2005, 2006 until now. Like, what are some of the ways that you've grown or changed? I mean, what have been some of the developments in your life that you feel
well, what
comfortable
was
sharing?
really interesting is that when the guys who did the documentary World of Wonder were the guys who did the original documentary about my mom, Eyes of Tammy Faye.
Yeah,
And they called me and said, we want to do this documentary that, ended up being like a 5-part series or 6-part series on
I think it was six
Sundance
part. Yeah,
channel. Yeah, they're like, we want to do this
you
thing.
can find
And
it on
Sundance
AMC
wants to buy
Plus.
it and turn it into a show. I was like, okay, I said, but to be honest with you guys, there's nothing in my life that's that interesting. Like, that's what I told them. I'm like, nothing in my life is that interesting. And they knew me from my mom's stuff, and they
Okay.
knew my work. I had done a book called One Punk Under God.
Mm,
And no, that was the documentary. I did a book called Son of a Preacher Man.
okay.
And Rolling Stone had done an article on me,
Oh
like
wow.
this 4-page article. And so like, well, we think there's something interesting here. I'm like, listen, I read. Like, I go to bars and I read, and I'm like, I sometimes smoke cigarettes and read. Like,
Mm,
that's what I do. I'm like, it's not anything great. And they said, we want to do it. And they kept hounding me, flew me out, put me in the nice hotels. All of a sudden, eventually, like, oh, I kind of like this. So where do I sign? I was like, it's up to you guys to find something interesting. Well, at that time, things do change.
yeah,
And I started to, I announced to my congregation that I supported LGBTQ rights.
that was powerful.
And I didn't realize this, but my board got divided. I thought that was going to be the end of my job, to be
Mm,
honest with you. Luckily, the board members who disagreed with me just stepped down, but they could have voted me out if they wanted to. And I
yeah,
said that you can vote me out, but Sunday, this is what I'm saying, so,
sure.
better vote fast. And And so that happened. My mom got sick again.
Oh,
She had been in remission for a while for her cancer had been, and her cancer came back. And then my marriage started to get really shaky.
okay.
And so, of course, they're there for all of this. And then I decided to move to New York so my wife can go to school at
Right. To
NYU.
NYU to become a psychiatrist, I think.
Yeah, to become a therapist. And I'm like going like, well, shit, I got to go. Now I'm moving to New York. I had to find a new place. So it ended up being kind of an interesting documentary for them.
It was, yeah.
They kind of hit me at it's a really weird to see because my life took a huge shift right then. Like it was a
Okay.
huge shift. So I moved to New York and we start meeting at a bar called Pete's Candy Store.
Oh yeah,
And, you know, a friend of mine who also has a documentary about him became my co-pastor, a guy named Reverend Vince Anderson, who's a
Wow.
musician and a local music. And he's just like a staple in Brooklyn and New York.
Okay.
And he
Okay.
plays with music called Dirty Gospel.
Oh my gosh, Pete
And
mentioned him in my last conversation. I was gonna say, was this the Dirty Gospel guy?
this is. And
Oh,
so,
okay.
so Vince ends up becoming my co-pastor, and Vince
Oh
is how I
wow.
met Pete.
Oh.
So Vince is a fan of Pete. I had heard of Pete, but I honestly was a little suspicious. And because I heard some of the stuff he was saying, and I was like, I don't know about that, you know. And I was like, this guy's got a secret or something, you know. And anyway, he got invited to service, and that's how me and Peter met. And I was going through I had been divorced for a couple of years at that point, and I'd just broken up with somebody, and so I was going through a tough time. And he's like, dude, come stay out at my house,
Hmm.
you know, come stay with me out in Connecticut. So I went and stayed with him in Connecticut, and we just became really great friends. And he really pushed. And that's the thing about Northern Irish people is they push, 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 and their comedy is even like tough, you know.
Interesting.
So like if you ever like, you know, they call it taking the piss, and that's how they show love is by giving you a hard time. So
Got
that's
you.
why you see me giving Pete a hard time online. That's just
Okay. Okay.
it's us just kind of giving each other nudges, you know. And so yeah, I mean my work changes because I start reading, you know, Paul Tillich. I start reading oh gosh, what's the guy's name who wrote Haunted? He wrote the book Haunted. I can't remember his name right now. John, is it John Caputo? Yeah, John
Oh, I
Caputo.
love John Caputo. He's one
So
of
he
my
introduced me to
favorites.
John Caputo. Ended up meeting John Caputo actually, which was really cool, and reading some of his work. And so all of a sudden, I just have this huge shift. Like, so I'm starting to read philosophy, which I never thought I would read. I mean, I was a high school dropout, you
Got
know,
you.
and have this really bad dyslexia. So like when I write a book, I always work with another writer so I can get the book done on time.
Got you.
And matter of fact, wrote most of my third book at Pete's house.
Wow.
And so I wrote a couple books. The documentary came out, but you know, I write all this stuff. But I've really had the past 15 years of my life have been pretty turmoil. It's pretty hard. Can't find a bright word for that.
Sure.
It's been a lot of turmoil, is what I was looking to say. Because I got remarried and I had kids, and I have two really amazing kids, 5 and 7. But my second marriage fell apart as well. I ended up moving to Minnesota for my second wife. I guess I learned that maybe I shouldn't move for women.
Hey, write that one down next time. No,
yes, might have that one tattooed right here on the.
There you go.
Don't do it. No moving. Moving truck with a little circle and a cross through it. But yeah, so and the funny thing is now I live in Seattle because my ex-wife has family out here, and I said I didn't want to live in Minnesota anymore. I was like, listen, I want to keep the kids together.
Yeah.
So we can move out there. You know, I'll move out there and we can keep the kids together and be in the same state. But yeah, I just think these introductions, and then like, you know, I was at one of Pete's events, Wake, and I met Todd McGowan.
Got you.
You know, and I heard Todd speak, and I was like, man, I'm like, dude, you're the most punk rock guy here. You know, and I said, that's saying a lot in Belfast, you know, and you know, and he had just come out. He had given Pete one of the first copies of the Hegel book.
Oh
And
yeah.
I was like, you know, I was like, oh, this guy's not going to be anybody I'm interested in. But after hearing him speak, and so I started reading him, and that book he wrote on Hegel really changed things for me. And I think I would say like Todd McGowan, Pete Rollins. Pete's going to love to be in this lineup. Todd McGowan, Pete Rollins, Paul Tillich, Dr. King, and my mother really allowed faith for me to kind of come alive again. Like it might just be a mustard seed size of faith,
sure,
but it's still there because of these folks, and allowed me to seeing the Hegel's passion for what he saw in Christianity kind of was like a validation for me. Seeing how Dr. King, saw people not as enemies, but his enemies weren't people, it was information. So he saw people as victims to misinformation.
Wow.
And Tillich's really radical ideas on grace, and then Hegel's ideas on contradiction and living within contradiction and dealing with the contradictions you can, but accepting the ones you can't. And so these ideas, and then of course all Todd's work on everything he talks about, like capitalism, trying to fill the void, and realizing like it's not even like Christianity is not about filling a God-shaped hole or filling a void. It's about accepting the void.
I know. I sometimes say, I don't know if it's original to me, but I guess it's an original thought. I'm sure someone said it. I've thought lately, we have a God-shaped hole that not even God can fill. Or even cares to.
Well, and it doesn't need to be, because the thing is I think what becomes powerful is when we start to see like what we're trying to fill the lack with.
Right.
And that we start to realize that none of those things are going to bring us peace or happiness. And so we kind of have to accept the story we find ourselves in. And so for me, that's helped a lot, is finding that and accepting that where I find myself, where I fit in, because I don't feel like I fit in a lot of places. And in a way, like, where my mother was able to walk through these, the right and the left and just be available, be this contradiction and not have this, the
like the opposition,
the opposition. Yeah. So what I've had to do is in a way, she was able to like not see the opposition or just kind of let the opposition kind of roll off her back.
Gotcha.
So I try to go into the same thing, but I see all the opposition. I feel it all. I think about it. It frightens me. It makes me nervous, and sometimes it encourages me that I'm doing the right thing.
Yes.
But it's still, I have to do the same work, even with seeing the opposition. And realizing though, that there's no group that I can scapegoat as the opponent, or as the enemy. I can't say like, well, it's the conservatives, and they're just, they're all a bunch of racists and they all vote this way and they all think this way. Cause I can point to points in my life where those people saved my life. And I can't say, well, it's all the liberals because they're all canceling people and they're all woke or this or that. A lot of them are. But what I realize is that like both sides are human.
Yes.
And there's opposition coming from both sides. And so what I've just decided is that I'm going to have to live in this contradiction in a way, because there's just certain things you have to accept about certain things. And that's just part of life, but I don't have to be it. And I think also going to Belfast and looking at the Troubles when, everything, all the civil war that basically happened in Belfast between Catholics and Protestants, and listening to this punk band called Stiff Little Fingers. And they would write songs about like, I don't want the right or the left, I don't want the Catholics, or I don't want the Protestants, I don't want your war, I want another way. Like, I'm going to go this way, and rejecting any binary thinking. And to me, those type of things affect my work and grace, and going like, okay, so now I don't have an easy bad guy target.
Wow.
And the problem is, it's like, so I'll give you an example.
Please.
Today is John Lydon's birthday. Johnny Lydon, you might know him as Johnny Rotten from the Sex Pistols. And he's someone I really love. I love his book. I read all his books. I love PIL. I love the Sex Pistols. I think they're great. A few years ago, though, he wore a Trump shirt, like "Make America Great Again." But also the things that he does is like he did a butter commercial so he could raise money to make his own album and not have to depend on somebody else to make the album.
Yeah.
He also adopted his wife's grandkids as his own kids and took care of them.
Mm.
His wife is suffering from Alzheimer's, and he's taking care of her in the late stages of really bad dementia. And he's really an interesting guy, and he's got a lot of different, and he's very opinionated too, you know. And so today when I was going on looking at these birthday things, everybody's like, fuck this guy, I hate John, you know, he's not punk rock, you know. But it's all, you know, I'm going like, well, if we weigh it out, like the guy sued Disney not to use his music and he lost. You know what I mean? Like, he takes care of his sick wife. He raised his grandkids as his own kids when he said he never wanted children.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like, this guy's living life.
Sure.
And he's not taking the easy way out, you know?
It's so easy to add a comment on social media, right? About what you agree or disagree with.
Well, and it's like, you know, everybody wants to add an asterisk to grace is what I always say. Like, everyone grace asterisk, except for, you know, because you're always looking for who's not included. And so, you know, I see people online, and what's hard is it's like a lot of liberal folks and progressive folks who I always thought were the safe people.
Right. Me too.
You know, the ones saying this stuff, that they sound like conservative Christians talking about heavy metal bands in the 80s. You know what I mean? I'm going like, what? And so I got online and said a few things back. But one of the things I thought was like, just because he votes different than you and I, this is why we write this person off. Like, are we really going to let like politics and politicians rule our world this much? And as you know, the country we live in is completely divided politically, just completely separate. And I feel like we're giving like the billionaires and the politicians all this power over us, you know, and the guys who run all these social media sites, all this power over us. And we just sit and we fight with each other and tear each other apart over like two or different, like there's just no room for nuance anymore.
Dude, you're right on, I think.
You know? And so that's what I try to do in my work is build a place for nuance. Last week I was talking about, you know, how men are suffering right now. Like not just conservative men and not just liberal men, but all men, not just white men and not just black men, but all men, you know, are dying of higher levels of suicide.
Yes.
They're failing in school. They're dropping out of the workforce, you know, and this horrible thing. And, you know, and so I was like, we got to talk about this type of thing. We need to be able to talk about this. And what's really hard for me is I was reading some of the comments about these things and people being like, well, they're finally getting what they deserve. Or, you know, oh, I guess they're just tired not being the center of attention. And I look at the world and go, who has turned us into such monsters? Like we're always tearing down and destroying each other and scapegoating each other to the point where there's not going to be anything left.
Wow.
You know, and we're always generalizing things. People are like, all cops are bastards, that cab, you know, and I'm like going like, no, I mean, the system is broken, yes, but not everyone is, you know, and how can we act as, I mean, it feels like we just aren't thinking deep enough, or we aren't acting like adults in some sort of way, you know,
that's a good way to put it.
On cruise control.
Yes. I feel like in some ways we're like adolescents, and I love adolescents. I work with teenagers all day long, but it's like we're teenagers running around just hating on each other.
Yeah. And it's killing us.
It's killing us.
You know, and excluding each other. You know, and people are like, well, you know, and one of the things they notice is that like a lot of men are going towards like these really conservative right-wing groups. And I'm like, well, yeah, because they make them feel like they're loved and accepted.
That's right.
You know, it's not so much that they hate you. It's just if they hate you and you already kind of don't like them, at least they're not hated in this small group.
Yes.
You know, and the thing is like,
right on.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? It's like 100%. When I was in high school, I remember like there were Nazi skinheads. And then there were sharp skinheads, and sharp stand for skinheads against racial prejudice.
Yeah.
And there were these two groups. And the funny thing is like, I didn't see the Nazi skinheads beating up a lot of like people of color. What I did see them is the sharps and the Nazis, all these white skinheads fighting each other. And so they were each other's common enemy. And both groups just seemed to be sad guys looking for places to belong.
Wow.
And subscribing to either side just to have somebody who said, you know, we care about you, you know, you're not a piece of shit and blah, blah, blah. Cause I had friends on both sides. And I remember sitting down with like friends who were like Nazi skinheads going like, why do you think this way?
Mm.
You know, and they would never give me good reasons. And I always be like, well, I think this is ridiculous, you know, but I was still able to have conversations with them. And I feel like
Sure.
I probably got that from my mom and my dad to always
Gotcha.
be like, don't just automatically knock somebody out. You got to sit down and have a conversation. And there's something I think Hegel talks about it, is that even when we even have huge disagreements, if it's in person, two humans interacting, there's an automatic recognition of each other's humanity
Oh, yeah.
that kicks in. It just
Yes.
naturally kicks in, and the other person becomes a human. You're sitting there fighting, and it might be in that moment. It might be in the few moments afterwards where you're like, "Oh, why did I do that?" And that
Why did
guy
I
was
do?
just defending his girlfriend, or that guy was just, you know, was skipping in line because he had kids, you know, whatever the argument was about.
Do you
But
think in our world of going back and forth on social media that aspect maybe gets muted some, and that's part of the
yeah,
problem?
I really do.
Okay.
You know, and my friends always think it's really funny because they always think, because I always go, and one of Pete's friends said they were going to hire me as a lawyer because someone was attacking Pete. And by the end of the conversation with this
Who would
guy,
attack
they were
Pete?
inviting, yeah, old Pete. Not even Pete has people who don't like him. So
Oh
we were
man.
attacking Pete. And so I go on, I'm like, hey, you know, he's my best mate. And what you're saying about Pete isn't right. And let me explain, you know, let's talk about this. And by the end of the conversation, the guy was like, hey, we should go skateboarding sometimes. It was great talking to you, blah, 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 you know. And so for me, even on social media, often I don't do this as much because I realized I was spending a lot of mental energy doing this.
Sure,
Uh,
sure.
but always trying to, like, I'm very defensive of people I care about because of what I went through as a kid,
Of course.
you know. So but it was always trying to be like, hold on, we got to work this out, we got to find the common ground, we got to take this to an end. This isn't just going to be an argument where we call each other pieces of shit and we go our separate ways,
Right.
you know. And to me, I think we do lose that a lot on social media, and that's why I would have to spend like an hour and a half going back and forth, but also being like, I'm not going to give up. Like, you're either going to have to block me or we're going to have to find a conclusion
Mm.
to this type of thing. And you know, that to me is what's important, and that's what I want to do in my work, is encourage people to argue well and to disagree well
Yeah.
and not go straight to war with each other, because
Mm.
what is absence of conflict is war.
Mm.
So let's not avoid conflict, let's figure out ways to have conflict. And it's amazing the fear that people have in conflict. Pete was telling me this parable about this village. They were all fishermen and they all fished. Everybody had to fish so they could eat. And there was one person not fishing,
Mm.
you know, and he was eating, but he wasn't fishing. So they all got together and they said, well, what are we going to do about it? And they decided what they were going to do. And so they come up and they slit his throat.
That's one way to do it,
What?
I guess. Yeah, right.
And I was like, Pete tells me this, and I was like, because me and Pete were having an argument. I was like, is he about to slit my throat? I was like, oh, you don't say. And and he goes, no, they were afraid of the conflict. They were so
Mm.
scared of the conflict. And Pete was saying this. He's like, Jay, I was so afraid of bringing this up to you because I was afraid of our conflict. And he's
Mm.
like, and it worked out. It worked out fine. You know, but we're often so afraid of the conflict that we'd rather kill the person and slit their throat than have the conflict.
Man, that's so good. I feel like
You
that's what we're
know?
doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like we're slitting each other's throats left and right. And to me, that's just really sad. And it's really sad to see in groups that I see it in people that I like, little groups that really meant a lot to me growing up, you
Yeah.
know, like, you know, my more liberal brothers and sisters or my punk rock friends, or, you know, different people like going
Sure.
after each other with such venom and wanting to like turn, you know, as like me and my dad don't talk and we've had a falling out, but my analyst has really helped me to see this. And he goes, you don't really have a lot of like ill will towards your father. You just want to
Mm.
kind of work things out.
Sure.
And we were talking about boundaries, and he's like, this is what I see. He's like, you know, most people just put up boundaries. He's like, but what you've put up is kind of a structure,
Mm.
you know, where there's a door and a couple of windows in your boundaries that are always allowing for someone to come back in or come back through. And he goes, that's what we don't do. We talk a lot about boundaries, but boundaries aren't necessarily good because it's just keeping everybody out. You know, we should have a door. So there's times where we are able to open those doors or open those windows and
I
have those
love that.
conversations
Yeah.
and not be full of malice. But unfortunately, that's what we see a lot of. And so that's where I think me and Pete's work kind of cross a little bit. I'm more for a general audience, definitely. I'm
Okay.
not a philosopher. But I really, I love philosophy and do my best to try to understand it.
Mm. Dude, that's awesome. Okay. I want to be very sensitive of your time. I feel like
Oh, I'm fine.
oh,
I'm
okay.
kid free today. So I'm kid free today.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So no, so am I. I know one of the questions that I had that I was wrestling with was even the name of the movie, the name of the documentary, the eyes of Tammy Faye. And it was
Yeah.
just like, right there, there's that beautiful sense in which I think she said whenever people died, I know her own mom and maybe a friend, she would take their glasses.
Yeah.
That was like symbolic for her. I was hoping maybe you could just get into that and help me understand why that was so important to her and what that meant to her.
Well, I'm going to really analyze this for a second, but
Please,
I
if
have her
if you don't mind.
glasses.
Oh,
I have her
wow.
glasses as well.
Wow.
One of the last things we did together was go out and get her new eyeglasses.
Mm.
And I actually have a picture of my daughter wearing them.
Oh, that's
And my mom
beautiful.
always felt like it's like you kind of get a little peek of seeing through the other's eyes.
Mm.
I
Isn't
mean,
that
it's
empathy?
definitely like, what?
I said, isn't that empathy?
Yeah, it's totally empathy, and it's totally kind of like a very like, unconscious way of thinking of like, like you're literally going to put on their glasses and see through their eyes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But still to her, it was like, you're sharing this experience, something that they
Mm.
looked through every day and saw through every day. And I think in some ways, like we were just talking about boundaries, my mom's makeup in some ways might have been seen as the boundary, but the eyes were always there. So you
Yeah.
could see in my mom when she was sad, you could see it in her eyes.
Mm.
And she, her eyes were like, it's funny that the movie and the doc were called The Eyes of Tammy Faye, because those are the places that don't have makeup. Those are the places that she's
Interesting.
not necessarily known for. And it's really cool because my daughter has my mother's eyes. My
Oh,
daughter has
wow.
blue eyes like my
Oh,
mom,
okay.
even though me and her mother are brown-eyed
Our brown eyed.
people.
Okay.
She's got my mom's blue eyes. But it is empathy, and it's the willing to realize that everybody hurts. She also used to have like all these little sayings like God doesn't make any junk,
Mm.
or that we're all made out of the same old junk, which they kind of were like, contradictions in a way.
Yeah.
But it was her way of seeing grace and humanity interacting with each other.
Mm.
Like, God doesn't make any junk, but we're all made out of the same old junk. Here's a
Mm.
great contradiction. But the fact is we're accepted within all of that mess. We are
Mm.
complete within that. Within that contradiction, there is some sort of completion, something that's higher than truth, if you will.
Mm.
That's more truth than truth. The God beyond God
Mm.
type of idea. And
Yes.
and so I think that was one of the things that was really interesting. And one of the things I found for myself being able, because I started seeing an analyst as soon as the movie started getting made, and then the
Okay.
play gets made. And so I'm like, I got to go to an analyst. I've been talking about it for years. So I'm like, I got to do this or I'm going to go insane. But then you realize like these films and this play, and even the documentary we're working on, and the documentary that was is it's seeing my mom through the eyes of someone else, through the
Mm.
eyes of others.
Mm.
And so it's really this really interesting thing of this focus on the window to the soul,
Sure.
the unconscious, the unconditional, the trying to walk in someone else's shoes and seeing what others see. It's really powerful, and it's just amazing to have a mother who kind of saw that way and thought that way and understood that. I mean, I find out like in like people who do like theology, you can always kind of tell like what glasses do they have? Calvin glasses on? Do
Right.
they have the Apostle Paul's glasses on? Do they have Jesus glasses on? I mean, like what lens are they seeing this? Because you have to
Sure.
negotiate. You have to make negotiations with the Bible and how, because it's just a
Absolutely.
collection of writings. It's not an actual book. The book is like a library, and
Sure.
so it's like, how do I what are you seeing? What lens are you using? So when I was on a, a podcast, and this guy was had a doctorate in theology, but it was a Baptist. He
Mm.
was a Baptist. So I knew the lens he was using with
Sure.
what we were arguing. I knew what line he was pulling. And for me, it's great because I don't have a line anymore. You know, I don't have a denominational line. So I'm like, well, I'm not, you know, I don't have to toe any line with me. I don't have to have a particular type of lens. I mean, I have my own lens, but I don't have a bigger, you know, denominational lens that I have to look
Sure.
through. And so you're able to have different conversations like that. But yeah, empathy is so vitally important because when you realize, well, why do people feel this way? You know, how does the other see me and why do they see me like this? But you only learn that from sitting down and having a tough conversation. You only learn that going like, well, how do I look to you? By asking someone, how do I look to you? And so that's
Yes.
why we often pay for therapists.
Right.
And, you know, because we want to be able to, like, you know, analysts kind of go, oh, guess what? Nope, you're going to see your eyes through your own eyes. And you're like, wow. But a lot of therapists kind of help you see yourself through
Yes.
their eye.
Yes.
And we pay for that because we don't get it
Mm.
out in the world. You know, we hunger for that and are willing to pay like a couple $100 an hour just to have someone else tell us how they see us, so we might be able
Yeah.
to change. But what we don't realize is that maybe that's, you know, we sit down with our family and go, well, how do you see us, you know, at Thanksgiving dinner, rather than
Mm.
arguing over politics? Well, how do you see me? You know, do I come in and do I look like I have like a little red star in my hat and like I'm a communist, or, you know what I mean? Like, what are you thinking? Like, what's going on here? And how can I better help you understand this? And how can I tell you how I see you and
Yes.
why I feel this way?
Mm.
But that requires patience, you
Mm.
know, and requires taking it. And that's another reason why I come back to Christianity a lot, is because it talks about like practicing the fruits of the spirit. And one of those things is patience. It's just
Mm.
learning to be patient with others. I think it really works, even when I doubt, like when I think it might be all fake and there's nothing anywhere,
Right.
but I still see the beauty of understanding and being patient with other people and trying to understand why I'm an enemy to my enemy,
Mm.
and growing from that. And that requires me to live life in a way that's not, it's not a fast, quick online app style of living, you know.
Right. Man, well
Um,
said.
but it's really tough.
Yes.
It's really hard, but
Okay.
it's worth it.
Yeah. Oh, it's so worth it. Um, can I go back to the documentary real quick? It's on my
Yeah.
mind because okay, just this is therapy for guys. I sometimes regretted it calling it that because I think people get the wrong impression that it's just going to be like bro talk and all that stuff. It's so far from that. I'm the least, you know, bro guy out there, but I work with men almost exclusively, and some of these things that we're talking about I think are so important in these communities. But I was fascinated by your relationship with your father. And the one thing that struck me about him was multiple times, I think you said in the documentary said that he was so fluent in the pulpit, right? He was this incredible
Yeah.
speaker and was able to relate to people in that mode, but maybe interpersonally really struggled. And
He did.
I'm just curious kind of how that impacted you. And if I know you said you haven't spoken to him in a couple of years, if that's still kind of the way that you see him, is just having a hard time connecting face to face interpersonally, but this incredible like speaker, right?
Well, I almost felt like too, like if I would be a guest on his show, we could
Ah,
have a more, because it's the audience
got
demands
you.
a response. You know what I mean?
Mm,
It's like, so you're on the spot to talk, you know, and so yeah, yeah. I mean, it's always been difficult. You know, it was either, you know, big, and I always was like, just when he come around
got you.
without the
Yeah.
camera, you know, I'm like, yeah, blah, 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 or like he started getting really like, you know, doing that conservative stuff and becoming really into like apocalyptic stuff, you know,
Got you.
and so I'd be like, Dad, you sound like Pat Roberts and blah blah. And in his mind, he saw me like attacking him,
Mm,
you know, and in my mind, I was like, we're gonna have a tough conversation, we're gonna figure this out, you know, and he didn't see it the same way.
mm,
And for me, it wasn't easy because he was my father, so I wasn't reading all the cues that I usually read, you know.
right.
I was just like, love me, daddy, love me, you know.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, it's hard for him. He was, you know, when he was a young man, really young, he was molested by a pastor in the church when
Oh
he was like
man.
6 years old for quite a few years.
Mm,
And I think that really stunted his development and growth.
of course.
And something happens when he's on the stage or when he's on camera where he's just able to become alive. I mean, I can remember times as just even a teenager, or like preteen, when he was at home, sometimes I would try to talk to him and he would just get glazed over and just sit there and just be staring off into the nowhere.
Wow.
And I would go, Earth to dad, like that. And it's funny because I've had my son do that to me a couple times, and so I keep an eye on it, because now I know, like, it's easy to get lost in your thoughts and the troubles of the day and worries for tomorrow and just
dissociate. And
dissociation is like my middle name, man.
Yeah, same here.
Like, there's times I'm like, I feel the steering wheel, I smell the air. I'm doing all the practices, all the EPT practices to be like, my soul is in my body, or whatever it is, And, but my dad, that happened to him a lot, and I don't think he really had words for it.
Got you.
Yeah. So yeah, it is. And he does struggle with that, and that was one of the reasons I was really hoping I could get him to be a part of this documentary that I'm working on, because he does so open up in front of a camera and he just becomes alive.
Yeah.
And I was hoping that we could have kind of that moment together.
Sure.
But now he doesn't trust anybody, and doesn't even trust me, which is really weird, because I was one of the people who helped him get out of prison early by working on his case.
Oh, wow.
As a teenager. Yeah, I did a lot with his appeal. And when I was like 15, 16, 17 years old.
Dude, that's fucking incredible. Wow.
Yeah. So that's what I was like, I got to get dad home. He can't spend 45 years in prison. So I ended up serving 5, but that was because me and another guy and a couple other people worked our asses off to get him home, and show, like, this is what really happened, and it was a lot of tough work. But so when he says, like, well, I don't know if I trust you, that just felt like it just, I just felt like I was cut off from the knees, I mean, it was just devastating. But at the same time, if I look at the history of my father's life and how he trusted Jerry Falwell, and how he trusted, like, he did interviews with people who just turned on him and butt of every joke. And so in some ways, you look at someone like my mom and you go, like, well, really, she's the exception to this rule. My father's really more likely the person who went to prison and suffered through all this stuff and is reacting in probably the more natural way.
Okay.
My mother was more of the one, like, no, I'm going to get up and fight. Like, she was going to, like, TJ Maxx and stuff, like, days before she died. Like,
I love
she
it.
just was like, I got to get out. I got to find a bargain. We're going to go to Applebee's, which was so silly. And,
Dude,
she just wanted to live.
There's a quote that I found that I shared with my wife, and we loved it. She said, what did she say? That going, that it's cheaper.
That shopping is cheaper than therapy.
It's shopping is cheaper than therapy. I love that.
Yeah. And, well, the way she did it, she was like a super, like, bargain hunter. Like, all of her Louis Vuittons and stuff were all fake. She loved to go to, like, flea markets and find out where they sell the fake stuff. And
yeah, we were like, dude, those are some badass Chanel earrings.
Yeah, and she would buy all these, like, fake. I even found some in, like, these Chanel. I gave Helen one of the Chanel things. I'm like, here's a fake Chanel necklace, that my mom bought for like $8 at the flea market, and it was always a fun adventure, with her. But she was kind of like, that was her way of, those were coping mechanisms as well.
Of course.
Not to, but my father had the more of the broken man, broken father, and now he doesn't barely trust anyone. And that's a really hard place to be, especially in my work. It's like, with what I do, but all I can do is, I send him a text saying, like, listen, I'm here. If you ever want to talk, I'm here.
Got you.
And I'll still communicate with him sometimes, even though if I don't know if I'm going to get anything back, I'll just send him a text or something, just feeling like, this is what I need to do. But yeah, it's tough, man. My parents are two very complex people. And then I'm like the combination of those two people come together.
Wow.
And, trying to make something out of my own life.
I told my wife, kind of joking, man, I would love to do therapy with that motherfucker. That would be amazing.
Well, you might fall asleep. Yeah, I mean, yeah, well, it's been, yeah, I've, uh, I've been really lucky with having some good,
Mm.
my analyst is really great and having some good therapists, but
Dude,
yeah, I mean,
I'm dying to ask. When you said Hegelian, I don't know if I should say this, but I'm just gonna say it. Is it John Mills?
no, no,
Okay.
no.
Okay. You
No, it's a
know,
guy out here in Seattle. His first name is Roy. I'll just say that for now.
okay.
But
Okay. I'm gonna research the fuck out of
yeah,
that.
I'll tell you his whole name later.
Okay.
But he's
He's incredible.
yeah, he's incredible, and I was shocked. And that's another reason I connected with him, because I just finished probably my second reading of Todd's book on Hegel,
Gotcha.
and then Pete gave me this Hegel reader, and that I was going through. And then I sat down and talked to him, and I said, well, I'm really looking for somebody who's really, he's Freudian. He's like, oh, I'm Freudian, but he's like also Hegelian. Oh, Hegelian.
Wow.
The same? He's like, yeah. And he's like, well, the contradiction. And he started talking about the contradiction. And I was like, oh,
Mm,
this is where I got to be.
yes.
And it's really helped me to learn to just accept who I am and to know my own worth.
Yes.
And, you know, it's it's such a different style of seeing an analyst is such a strange like type of therapy, because
Mm,
things get revealed to you like in your own head over time.
mm.
So it's like there's the gears start working, and the unconscious and all this stuff, things start to change, and you're going like, oh, I'm seeing that. Like, because one day I was like, you should like have a therapist that helps us deal with the analyst. You know what I mean? Like, somebody like, is it normal that these changes are happening the way they're happening? And he's like, yeah, no, that's what happens. And, because it's completely different than like DBT
Right,
therapy,
right.
And so, but yeah, it's pretty great to be able to get the help you need. And it's made me a better leader, a better speaker, a better father, and
Gotcha.
that's how I see it, as like, since this is called therapy for guys, I
Sure,
mean, like
sure,
this,
sure.
I mean, I literally see like therapy as like if I was going to school for philosophy or theology or anything to improve my life, I
Yes.
see it as an investment, like, because unfortunately I have insurance, but my insurance doesn't cover seeing an analyst,
Right.
and so it costs a lot. But I'm like, this is going to make me a better dad, and being a
Mm,
better dad's going to make me a better speaker, and being a better speaker, you know what I mean, and just so on and so
100%.
forth.
Oh yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so that's why I think that's vital. So
That's
if
great.
anybody's listening and you're sitting here going like, I'm listening to this because I don't know if I should do it, just do it. Like,
Dude, I
it's
really appreciate you
worth
saying
it.
that. Yeah. Okay, so Jay,
Um,
I feel like I've taken way too much of your time. Is there
no
anything
problem.
else about you, your incredible, beautiful mother, who my wife and I both wish we would have met because we want to give her a hug. We want to actually get a hug from her. I think that's the better way to
Yeah.
say it, honestly. And I want to peer into her beautiful eyes. Is there anything
No,
else
thank
that
you.
you feel like you want to say, kind of before we, close it off?
Well, no, I mean, it's funny, like, just mom, it's funny because she was like 4'11", very
Really?
small
I'm six
lady.
five, so I probably wouldn't.
Yeah. I mean, she would be like at your waist,
Yeah.
and she was a real powerhouse, and
Yeah.
I'm really grateful to be able to, she's been gone 15 years now, and it's like
Mm,
I had a really amazing experience with my mother. Like my sister had a different experience with my mom, but they had a different,
sure.
different one,
Sure.
but it's like I'm grateful for the experience I had with her and that she was in my life. And I'm grateful now to see people celebrating her work
Mm,
and looking back and going like, okay, because your whole life, I grew up with dyslexia. So it was always, oh, you're lazy, or, oh, you're dumb, or, oh, and you want to like right all these wrongs, and then
mm,
seeing like these people like Elton John and Jessica Chastain and like World of Wonder and all these people celebrate my mother and even my father to a bit.
wow.
It's kind of like, it's kind of like, okay, save your applause to the end of the show, like let life continue to go. Like, redemption comes in very different shapes and different ways. Like if you would have told me that I was going to talk on a Zoom call with Elton John one day about a play that he made about my mother, I would just be like, that's insane.
Yeah, that's fucking crazy.
But that happened.
Wow.
And what was he celebrating is my mother's love and compassion for others.
Mm.
And, I always go back to thinking about this verse in the Bible where Jesus, the last thing he says at the Last Supper, he goes, I want you guys to love each other. And he goes, because by your love for one another, people will know that you're mine. And I think if my mom wanted to be known something, she would want to be known as someone who really loved Jesus. Very Jesus-y lady. And that's what she's being celebrated for, is her love, her unconditional. They know she is known for her love for others.
Absolutely.
And so to me, it's like, job well done, Mom. And that's what I want in my life. Like, I want to be known because I gave grace to others, that I showed grace to others, and maybe too much grace, and so to have that part of your life, a part of your lineage, and learning to live with it, like, I think for some people it's like a big shadow, like, oh, I'm not going to come up here and talk about my theology. I'm going to talk mostly about my mom, but that's okay, because now my mom's influenced my theology. Well, God, I mean, how Freudian is that?
Yes.
I am Freud's dream.
I love it, man.
And
I don't see a penis behind you though.
No, that's true. I've given up all penis-shaped things in my mouth. So
okay, got you.
I mean, unless Diet Coke counts, but my mother was also a Diet Coke.
Dude,
addict,
I was wondering if you got the touch of the Diet Coke addiction.
I did. It's bad. I gave it up for a while. This is another thing. You can edit this out if you want, or keep it.
No, fuck that. I'm gonna keep everything.
He sat me down and got me to quit Diet Coke for about 6 months. Wow. Because he was like, I'm not buying you Diet Coke anymore, bro. And I was like, what do you mean you're not buying me Diet Coke? He's like, I don't want to be part of it. You're like, you got a problem, So me and my mom have both had bad Diet Coke addictions, but I'm also like a recovering alcoholic and haven't had a drink of alcohol since I was 20. So,
wow.
So I'll, I'm going to try a little bit more with the Diet Coke, because I'm afraid there's some things in it that aren't great
Keep
for
the Diet Coke. I'll be anti-Pete and say, I'm going to encourage you.
There you go. And now you're speaking my language.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's all I have to say is, like, be open to be patient with others, and try not to scapegoat each other's, and don't let the media do your thinking for you. Don't let society pressure you into thinking one way or the other. It's okay to question authority, even when the authority is the cool people.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I mean, right now it's like, the authority's like hip, and it's like the company's like,
that's why I think we're adolescents, right? We're kind of looking for the cool crowd, and we're wanting to follow them, and it's not about that.
Yeah, no, it's learning to live a radical life of radical individuality.
Yes.
And if you're lucky enough, you're able to do that in a way that doesn't exclude people based on things that you don't agree with. And you're able to realize that that's more of an opportunity to learn and grow more, and maybe even be put on the right path yourself.
Yes.
By allowing that to be a part of your life. And also realizing, like, I think this is one thing I have to remind myself constantly, is that there's a lot of people who are not going to read Hegel. A lot of people aren't going to read Tillich. A lot of people aren't going to pick up a Freud book, or a lot of people aren't going to go to a psychoanalyst,
Sure.
Or go through DBT, but I have to be a little bit more patient with others, but at the same time, why I do what I do is because I'm communicating with a lot of people who those are avenues they might not take.
Yeah. Hey, hopefully they're going to watch the documentary that you're going to do.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think hopefully they will. It's going to be awesome. It's like never ending. Like, I feel like we've been working on it forever.
Gotcha.
But we're getting close to the end, and I'm very excited about the outcome. So
that's
but
awesome.
Thanks for having me. I feel like I'm very different,
Jay.
like very different than a Rollins or a,
no, honestly, this has been one of my favorite conversations. Like, I can definitely tell there's this thread with you and with Todd McGowan and with Pete Rollins. You're the guys that I want to get close to, because I'm so resonating. It's exactly how I think about things. So it's a cool thread, man. It is a cool thread.
And it's not a clubhouse, it's not a secret society.
Yeah, fuck
It's something
that.
like, and I just speaking from my own, being dyslexic, being high school dropout,
Sure.
being self-taught with most of my work is can be intimidating to be best friends with someone who has, who is a doctor in
Sure.
philosophy,
Sure.
and then have more friends who are doctors in philosophy and filmmakers and all these things. But what's brilliant is when you get to know these people and you can find common ground, and the common ground you're looking at is how can we help others live life well at the same time live our lives well.
Oh,
And that's a
man.
really great way to live,
Dude, I couldn't agree more.
you
Okay,
know.
so Jay, I have this thing that I try to end every podcast just by asking the guests to finish with the statement, continue the conversation, just
Okay.
capturing the spirit of what I'm about. Would you mind just saying that?
Am I just saying continue the conversation?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Did Pete laugh?
Well,
Did he laugh
he
before?
laughed and then he said something else and then he said it.
Yeah, no, because we're both get weird when we get put on the spot to say things. Um, oh yes. Hold
You
on a
can
second.
also
I
say
don't know
your own
why.
version of it too.
You know what? It's continue the conversation. Is that it?
That's it.
Continue the conversation.